Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you, wherever you are. My name is Wajad Saeed Khan. I'm a journalist based in New York City. Assalamu alaikum, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. मैं वजाद सईद खान एक और स्पेशल वीलॉग के साथ न्यूयॉर्क से आपके लिए जो लेटेस्ट है वो आज का जो मेरा व्लॉग है, बिकॉज टॉपिक मेरा ऐसा है कि मैं अंग्रेजी और उर्दू दोनों में करूंगा जैसे पहले करता आ रहा हूं, क्योंकि इंटरनेशनल ऑडियंसेस भी देख रही हैं। जो तवज्जो है, बहुत सारे बैनुल अक़वामी जो हमारे दोस्त हैं, इत्तेहादी हैं, कुछ दुश्मन हैं, वो देख रहे हैं. So this is going to be both in English and Urdu. I'm going to give you an update on firstly the very latest, and then we are going to go to Washington with Michael Kugelman of the South Asia Center of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Okay, so it's day 2 of Imran Khan's arrest. 2 दिन हो गए अब Imran Khan साहब के arrest को. The army has been deployed in some of Pakistan's major cities, Peshawar, etc., in Islamabad, all of KP. The फौज 2 शहरों में और KP के सूबे में deploy हो चुकी है. At least 2 PTI leaders. Khan, of course, has been arrested, but one of his leading deputies, Asad Umar, has also been arrested. Asad Umar साहब भी अब arrest हो गए हैं. Police has taken action across the board. More than 1,000 people have been arrested, according to police reports. According to the PTI, more than 1,300 people have been arrested. Police कह रही है कि 1,000 PTI के एहलकार पूरे मुल्क में अरेस्ट हुए हैं और PTI के मुताबिक 1,300 अरेस्ट हुए हैं. How many people have died? We don't quite know. But the PTI is claiming over 50 of its protesters, of its workers, of Imran Khan supporters have been killed. The word the PTI is using with video evidence is straight shooting. That is Pakistaniism for live firing, using live ammunition against unarmed protesters. PTI ने वीडियो एविडेंस फराहम की है, सबूत फराहम किया है कि उसके एहलकारों के खिलाफ लाइव एमिनेशन यूज की जा रही है और क्लेम कर रहे हैं कि 50 से ज्यादा लोग उनके शहीद हो चुके हैं. The police have also been injured. No military casualties have been reported. काफी पुलिस, दर्जनों पुलिस एहलकार भी इंजर हुए हैं. कोई अभी तक फौजी एहलकार अभी तक इंजर नहीं हुआ या शहीद नहीं हुआ. PTI is saying that these are not our people. Some of these protesters are not PTIs. In fact, they're goons who've been inserted in the melee, in the chaos, to give the party a bad name and perhaps get it banned in the long run. PTI कह रही है कि ये जो लोग हैं जो ये जलाओ घराव कर रहे हैं, इसमें कुछ लोग शायद इनके हैं, मगर सब लोग इनके नहीं हैं. गुंडे भी शामिल हैं जो PTI का नाम खराब कर रहे हैं. मरियम नवाज, one of the leading figures in the Pakistan Democratic Movement, which is the government, even though she is not an elected official. She is the chief organizer of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, the party which is currently in power. She's saying that the PTI had been planning for this moment for months and that these are trained goons. That's what she's saying. Maryam Nawaz कह रही है कि ये गुंडे महीनों से ज़मान पार्क में ट्रेनिंग कर रहे थे. Legally, of course, we're keeping an eye on that ball. Khan is now in police custody. He's going to remain in police custody for at least 8 days. There's multiple cases going on against him. I've spoken to his lawyer. He's saying that the deck has been messed with, and that judges have been reshuffled in ongoing cases. And even though at least one of those cases, for example, which is about his alleged daughter, his allegedly illegitimate daughter, Tyrion White, even though that case was dismissed with a 2-1 vote, it's just been decided that it'll be heard again. So he's saying that there's a clear bias in the judicial system. खान साहब के जो वकील हैं फैसल चौधरी, वो कह रहे हैं कि जो केसेस हैं, जो जजेस हैं, जो जिस तरीके से, जिस स्पीड से ये सुने जा रहे हैं केसेस, तोशखाना का केस, टिरियन वाइट का केस जो डिसमिस हो गया मगर फिर इन्होंने एक और बेंच बना दिया, इससे लग रहा है कि खान साहब को डिसमिस करना चाह रहे हैं. एक बायस है. That's the latest on the local front. Internationally, of course, the British Prime Minister has spoken about this as well. He said that this is Pakistan's internal matter. China has not said anything officially. For the last couple of days, they've only been talking about the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and that's pretty much about it. However, the US Secretary of State has spoken, and he has said that whatever happens in Pakistan, and I quote, "We hope it is consistent with the rule of law and constitution." अमेरिका ने एम कर स्टेटमेंट दिया है कि जो भी हो पाकिस्तान में आइन और कानून के मुताबिक हो। अंग्रेज जो प्राइम मिनिस्टर हैं इंग्लैंड के, उन्होंने कह दिया है ब्रिटेन के ये पाकिस्तान का अंदरूनी मामला है, चाइना ने कुछ नहीं बोला। नाउ लेट्स पिवट टू Washington, to my dear colleague, the very well respected South Asia wala by day, by the afternoon, of course, which we are headed into right now. He is also the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. One of my favorite Beltway boys. Hi, Michael Kugelman. Good to have you here again.
Thank you. Good to be back here with you, and I appreciate the kind introduction.
All right. So no, I'm just going to, for the sake of my Urdu audiences, I'm going to say that whatever you say, Mike, I'm going to try to translate it or transliterate it to the best of my, or at least summarize it to the best of my abilities towards the end. So अगर आप उर्दू में सुनना चाहेंगे माइकल ने क्या बोला, तो आखिर में मैं आपको बताऊंगा और इनका जो खुलासा है इनकी बातों का वो दूंगा. All right. Let's talk about the Beltway, Michael. You've heard the latest. Unless you have something to add to it, please advise us. What is happening in Washington? How is Washington, different elements in your think tank, beyond the State Department, etc., people you talk to, what are people thinking about this current wave of chaos?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of concern, within the U.S. government. The State Department and others have been tracking internal developments in Pakistan for quite some time, and especially since this policy crisis exploded onto the scene. And indeed, what happened to Khan yesterday is something that's being seen with considerable concern. I mean, not to be too simplistic about it, but I think that there's a bipartisan view in Washington, which has been there for quite some years, that stability is Washington's most important interest in Pakistan. I know many in Pakistan would say that no, in fact, Washington seeks destabilization in Pakistan. That's not true. The U.S. worries about stability considerations in Pakistan, and clearly, the way things have been playing out over the last few weeks, and especially the last few days, has brought us to the point where I would argue that Pakistan is seeing a greater threat to public order than at any time over the last decade plus, for sure. This is concerning. Now, in terms of how Washington has responded, I mean, you made reference to the Secretary of State's comment. I think that the U.S. government, the State Department, most realistically, has to be very careful with its public messaging here. The U.S. government, of course, was dragged into Pakistan's internal political situation last year because of Imran Khan's regime change allegations, and so it's had to be very, very cautious. In that sense, I don't think that you're going to expect to. I don't think we can expect to see any type of formal statement from the U.S. government. Certainly, if U.S. officials are asked during pressers, by journalists what they think about the situation, you'll hear something similar to what Blinken already said, that basically, we're not going to get involved, but however things play out, we would support any type of process that as you know, the PTI, and particularly the U.S. Membership of PTI, has been very active in trying to change perceptions and minds in the U.S., including in Washington, and especially in Capitol Hill, about Khan and the PTI and where it stands. And I think that we've seen in recent weeks a number of members of Congress who have been issuing statements of concern about the rights situation in Pakistan. And we've seen, just since Khan was arrested, Brad Sherman, who has been very vocal on Pakistan of late. He has essentially been very vocal and very explicit about how concerning the situation is. So I think that if you're going to hear messaging and statements, things like that, it's more likely to come from Capitol Hill. The administration itself will be very quiet, though indeed, I think that the administration's hope is that however things play out in Pakistan, that this period of uncertainty and serious levels of volatility and unrest, that's short-lived. I would also argue, here we get into tricky things. I'll end with this point. For many years, the U.S. position on Pakistan has been one that is in support of civilian-led democracy. So you had things like the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill, which were passed some years ago, which tripled assistance to civilian institutions. There is a very genuine level of support for civilian-led democracy, but the U.S. has tended to privilege its relations with the military, which has flown in the face of that goal. But I do think, in terms of what the U.S. wants to see now, it clearly would like to see some type of administration, political setup where the army is not going to be poking its nose in everything. We're a long way from getting to that point.
Right. That brings me to my natural. That's perfect because I want to push on to a little bit of wargaming here with you, Michael. But from a DC perspective, it's day two of the showdown, which was expected and is finally here with Khan. How do you see what's happening? Over 50 claimed killed by the PTI. The army is in at least two major cities, including the capital, and Khan's stronghold of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. That province, that's effectively what people are saying. There's martial law being implemented in that province because that is where the crux of Khan's support base and a very sturdy support base is. Of course, there's enhanced security presence across the board. Uh, we know about the internet blockages. We know about cell phone services being blocked, but they're being restored as well. Give me some projections here from a DC perspective. How do you war game this?
Well, I mean, I think that there's so much that we don't know. We don't know where things are going. There's a lot of uncertainty. But I think what you and I could agree on, and many would agree on, is that the most powerful players in the country, i.e., the senior army leadership, really have no interest in reconciling with Khan, and really have no interest in seeing him return to power. So that suggests to me that there's not going to be any sense of urgency to try to take steps that would make it more likely that Khan could find himself freedom anytime soon, which suggests that he could be he may not see freedom for quite some time. I really don't know, to be quite honest, but the state, particularly the army leadership, would seem to have no immediate incentive to let him go so quickly. And I think that the level of unrest, the type and intensity of unrest, I think will be dictated in great part by how long Khan stays detained, jailed, whatever the case may be. Now, one could argue that the state, particularly the army, would be perfectly comfortable with some protests playing out over the next few days, even over the next few weeks, and hope that eventually the protesters will lose interest, especially if they don't hear anything about Khan, especially if other top leaders of PTI continue to be arrested. And indeed, as you've noted, several other top PTI leaders have been arrested today. And I think that in that case, the army's hope would be that everyone or the PTI support base eventually moves on, which to me seems very hard to believe, because we're not talking about a pedestrian political prison here. We're not just talking about any old Pakistani politician who's put behind bars, and there have been so many of them over the years. I mean, this is someone, Khan, who is, I'd say, could confidently describe as the most popular political figure in Pakistan today. He has a large, impassioned support base, and because of his cult of personality effect, I think that he tends to generate certain types of particularly robust reactions from his impassioned support base, and especially when something like an arrest happens. But that said, it's very hard to war game this. I mean, I'll give you my bottom line, very succinct assessment about where I think things are going, where I fear things are going. Combine the fact that Khan was arrested with the fact that other top leaders are being arrested, and also combine the messaging we've heard from senior government officials in Pakistan in recent weeks. Not only have been making all kinds of allegations against Khan, and such as instigating a smear campaign against the army chief, but also allegations against the party itself, which include describing it as a group of miscreants aided by banned organizations. What this all suggests to me is that the state may be trying to not only take Khan out of the picture and build up a case for disqualification, but also try to take steps to sideline, if not ban, the party on the whole. And I think that could have very serious implications for sure. That's just a possibility. I may be off, but that's where I fear things might be going.
Right. Keeping that flow of stream of consciousness in mind, let's assume that they do that. They cut off Khan. They try him. They ban the party. There are indications from within the PTI camp. By the way, you're not alone in that fear. There are indications from within the PTI camp that that's exactly where things seem to be headed. Um, but let's game this out further. Let's say that happens, and then there's further chaos, further violence, further pushback from the Khan camp, which triggers, well, what Pakistan isn't unfamiliar with, a proper coup. Now, a not so proper coup, a diet coup, is already in place. For example, well, maybe that's going ahead a bit too far. But at least if you're in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province right now, that's what you're saying, that the army's on the streets. So from that perspective, with the military and its men and its machines on the streets of Pakistan, certain streets of Pakistan, um, the takeover effectively is in play. But what if there's a proper takeover? What if, keep in mind that there's a bit of a deadline with the elections as well, and the Supreme Court has given a deadline as well. We're heading into a constitutional abyss there as well. What if the 14 comes and things haven't calmed down and boom, they take over? What happens? And again, I need you to push me through this little alley with the right technical details. What happens in Washington? Do sanctions get triggered? Are there condemnations? Does the US pull out its staff from its embassy? What happens on the ground and in DC?
Yeah, so it's been, by my count, correct me if I'm wrong, about 15 years that Pakistan has had formal military rule since the end of the Musharraf administration, which I believe is a record. Pakistan has never gone that long with so many consecutive years of civilian rule in a formal sense. Of course, we know that the army has continued to be very potent and active and influential, and even during the Khan years, it was essentially governing in partnership with the civilians. But indeed, it's been a long time. So, if the army were to take power directly again, that would be significant and consequential, just because it's been such a long time since that happened. And it would really be the final death knell for democracy in Pakistan, which I would argue has been on parole, so to speak, for quite some time as it is. So again, very hard to predict what the reactions would be, whether in Pakistan or here. But I could briefly get into both. Um, my sense is that the army in Pakistan is experiencing an extremely turbulent period in terms of how it is now perceived in Pakistan, its levels of popularity. The Imran Khan phenomenon has really, I think, put the army on the defensive in ways that it has not been for quite some time. Now, you go back to the 2011 when the Bin Laden raid happened. There was a lot of anger at the army back then, as I recall. Kiani apparently, as I understood it, took a lot of flack from his own officers about how that went down. But what's happening now, I think, is much more significant and much more intense. In that you have Khan and his very large support base, most popular political figure in Pakistan, that has not necessarily turned on the army as an institution, but has been incredibly critical of it, using the most withering criticism that one could imagine because of the narrative that Khan has put out there, that the last army chief was behind his ouster, and that the successor, General Munir, must be continuing with that to some degree. So, the army is facing significant levels of stress right now. So if the army were to take over, I would think that many in the country would not support that idea, just for a number of reasons, not just because of what it would mean for democracy, but also because this is an institution that people would like to see less of, not more of, which of course is a change from the past, when I think there was a lot more receptivity to this idea of the military, restoring stability and trying and so on and so forth. So I think that if there were a coup, that could just exacerbate instability and hasten more destabilization. But of course, it depends how it's carried out, for sure. Now, in terms of what the reaction would be in Washington, I do think there would be immediate condemnations. And again, there's an irony here, because the U.S. government has privileged relations with the army chiefs over the years. Now, the joke in Washington is that no senior U.S. official worth their salt knows the name of the Pakistani defense minister at any time because of the preference to deal with the army chief. But there would be condemnations. There would certainly be condemnations. I don't know about sanctions, but there would certainly be condemnations. With all these reports that have floated around in recent months about the possibility of martial law being imposed in Pakistan, I'm quite sure. I mean, the U.S. government would not go on the record saying this, but I'm quite confident that the U.S. would not support anything like that. But then again, sort of privately, maybe some officials in Washington may think that if an army takeover would at least eventually restore a semblance of stability in Pakistan, maybe there would be some receptivity to that. But I think the public and the official position from Washington would be a strong condemnation of an army takeover in Pakistan.
That last bit is critical, that there are people in Washington who at least privately would admit that a military takeover, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that a potential military takeover might as well stabilize Pakistan, considering what the options really are on the ground. But just for my clarity, Michael, before I let you go, I know you're short on time, but no sanctions are triggered automatically by Congress or any other American law, for that matter, if there is a military takeover at all?
By the way, I should say I do have some more time. What I had told you, I do have a bit more time if you want to ask a few more questions. Schedule cleared up a bit. Yeah, always for you.
Thanks, Mike.
It would be there would have to be a process that plays out, an interagency process, and of course Congress would have to be involved. But you look at what happened after Pakistan's officially became a nuclear state. It was pretty fast to where we got to a point where the sanctions came into place. But I think that in this case, and again, this is all very potential. I don't know about you, but I actually don't expect there to be a military coup in Pakistan. But if we suspend our disbelief a bit and get into this possibility, I think the administration would be very cautious. It would certainly condemn a takeover, but I don't think it would jump to sanction the country until it has a better sense as to where things are going. And I should also say, indeed, I indicated that some U.S. officials may quietly, privately think that a takeover would be a good thing for the country in the immediate term, and that it would bring a semblance of stability, and stability being America's main concern in Pakistan. But as I had said before, what might have happened in the past wouldn't necessarily happen now, particularly because the army is on the back foot. It's on the defensive. A lot of people in the country are very unhappy with the army. And so that means that an army takeover, would not necessarily restore order and bring a semblance of stability. One could argue that a military coup never brings stability in a broader context. So if there are officials here that would think that it would be perhaps a good thing to see the army come back to restore a semblance of stability, they may well be wrong, I should say.
Right. Well, let me quickly take you last two questions. This one's about the IMF. It's on the other. I know it's on the other side of town, but I need you to stop talking about geopolitics for a minute, or at least congressional politics, and let's go to the IMF. What's the latest there? Because there is a school of thought in Pakistan that the entire deal with the IMF is being held hostage by the lack of stability. And the lack of stability will only come when this Imran Khan matter goes away somehow. Meanwhile, Imran Khan and his friends think that the lack of stability will go away when elections happen and there's a proper government in place. That's the IMF debate internally. What's the Washington perspective on that? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that the main reasons for the holdup with unlocking the IMF funds are that the IMF has not been sufficiently convinced that Pakistan is really going to follow through on the austerity measures that are required by the IMF. And the IMF knows that there have been so many previous agreements and arrangements with Pakistan where Pakistan has reneged on its commitments, and the IMF simply doesn't want to see that happen again. I mean, basically, Pakistan's too big to fail argument no longer works with the IMF. The IMF also is looking to see indications that Pakistan's key creditors will And then if that sort of takes us to the issue of the political crisis, as you know, the Chinese foreign minister was in Islamabad a few days ago, and he very publicly said that, we'd like to see, or we look forward to more stability in Pakistan so that we could work with the Pakistanis. Those weren't his exact words, but this was a very rare case of a senior Chinese official publicly calling out Pakistan, even if indirectly, for its political crisis, and saying, guys, you need to fix this up. And then right after he made that comment, Khan was arrested. We are where we are today. So my sense is that Pakistan's key creditors are, and including China, are not going to be any more inclined now to commit to sending significant amounts of funding into Pakistan, given what's happened over the last few days. Now, I do think that, yes, the IMF also worries about the broader political implications, the sense of uncertainty in the country, the weakness of the current government, uncertainty about election dates, all of that. I don't think those are the reasons why the deal has been held up, but I think that certainly plays into these issues as well.
Right. That was going to be my last question, but I think you got it, unless you want to allow me my follow-up on China. How keenly do you think that our friends inside the Pakistani military take those cues from, for example, China, from, for example, Tony Blinken, from, for example, the British Prime Minister, who has said that this is an internal matter of Pakistan's? That's very non-intrusive of him, by the way. He also just met, for the record, the Pakistani Prime Minister on the sidelines of the coronation of Charles III. So how seriously do you think the military elite specifically takes cues like that? Because, I mean, if I were to connect those dots, the Chinese foreign minister saying, completely out of habit, but saying what he did say in Pakistan about stability, boom, next day Khan's gone. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's it's a fair point. I would have said that ordinarily the Chinese in particular have a lot of leverage over the Pakistani leadership of the day, including the top military leadership. And, we know that China has already been concerned about a number of things in Pakistan, not just the political crisis, but also the security risks to its investment assets in the country. There are a number of urban legends that could well have some truth. One of them being that when Musharraf decided to move in on the Red Mosque to launch that offensive, it's because there was a lot of pressure from China. That's just one example. So in that sense, it is quite striking that Khan's arrest happened so soon after the Chinese foreign minister made that comment. Whether that suggests that the army doesn't care, it's so fixated, laser-like on this vendetta with Khan and just wanted to deal with him at that moment. That certainly could be it. But I think that these countries you mentioned, China, the US, the UK, other Western countries, are critical for Pakistan's interests because of the trade relationships they have with Pakistan. It's oftentimes forgotten in Pakistan, but the US is Pakistan's top destination for exports, and by far as well. And one of the many reasons why Khan had his falling out with the army is that the army, as I understand it, was increasingly unhappy with Khan's increasingly strident criticism of the U.S. and the West at a moment when Pakistan's economy was sputtering a bit. So that would suggest that the military should be heedful, mindful of these concerns that might be expressed by key trade partners, as well as key economic partners on the whole, like China. But again, I think at this point, pardon me, I'm all choked up by all of this. I think that the gloves are off, quite frankly. The gloves are off within the senior army leadership, and the idea now is just to get Khan out of the picture, by putting him behind bars, disqualifying him eventually, and then focusing on everything else. So sort of like the rest can follow afterward. And I think that's a very dangerous calculus if it's true, but that does seem to be the case.
Michael Kugelman, my favorite South Asia wala inside the Beltway, at least. Mike, good to see you. Thank you. We'll let you go now. I've taken up too much of your lunch hour. Cheers, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Take good care.
All right. So that was Michael Kugelman of the Wilson Center. Michael से बहुत important बातें हुई. क्या बातें हुई? उनका खुलासा उर्दू में. अब ये लुबे लुबाब मैं आपको बताऊंगा. बट माइकल से जब मैंने पूछा कि वॉशिंगटन में क्या हो रहा है, तो उन्होंने कहा कि वॉशिंगटन में ऑब्वियसली ऑफिशियली तो जो बोला गया है, टोनी ब्लिंकन जो इधर के वजीर खारजा हैं, उन्होंने जो बोला है कि आइन और कानून की बालादस्ती होनी चाहिए जो भी पाकिस्तान में है। मगर इम्पोर्टेंटली माइकल ने यह भी कहा कि कुछ लोग हैं वाशिंगटन में जो चाहते हैं कि कानून और आइन से ज्यादा स्टेबिलिटी चाहते हैं, और अगर फौज ने टेक ओवर कर लिया, मार्शल लॉ लग गया, तो कम से कम प्राइवेटली, ऑफिशियली नहीं, प्राइवेटली कम से कम लोग कहेंगे कि मार्शल लॉ ठीक है, क्योंकि फौज एक स्टेबलाइजिंग जो है वो फैक्टर है। फिर मैंने पूछा माइकल से कि प्रोजेक्शंस क्या हैं, वॉशिंगटन में ये कैसे देख रहे हैं कि आगे क्या होगा। इस पे क्लियरली उन्होंने जो कहा है, ये काफी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है। उन्होंने क्लियरली कहा है कि लग रहा है कि खान को कट ऑफ किया जाएगा, डिस्क्वालीफाई किया जाएगा और इलेक्शन के प्रोसेस से दूर रखा जाएगा, और शायद पीटीआई को भी कल अदम कर दिया जाए। लग रहा है कि दैट्स वेयर थिंग्स आर गोइंग। सैंक्शंस का मैंने पूछा कि कल अगर मार्शल लॉ लग जाता है तो सैंक्शंस तो नहीं लगेंगी अमेरिका की तरफ से, तो नहीं, कोई ऐसा मैकेनिज्म नहीं है। और फिर मैंने जब पूछा कि जब ब्रिटिश प्राइम मिनिस्टर कहते हैं कि आपका इंटरनल मैटर है, जब चाइनीज प्राइम मिनिस्टर, फॉरेन मिनिस्टर कहते हैं कि हमें स्टेबिलिटी चाहिए, तो पाक फौज कैसे रिएक्ट करती है? उन्होंने कहा ऑब्वियसली लोग कॉग्निजेंट हैं, रिएक्शंस आते हैं, और फौज ऐसे भी देखती है कि ये खाली हमारे इत्तेहादी नहीं है मगर हमारे ट्रेड पार्टनर्स भी हैं, हमारे साथ तिजारत करते हैं। और ये उन्होंने जरूर कहा, और ये बहुत क्रिटिकल है कि अमेरिका पाकिस्तान का सबसे बड़ा ट्रेड पार्टनर है, तिजारती पार्टनर है, और इमरान खान के ताल्लुकात फौज से जब खराब हुए, जब अमेरिका से इमरान खान के ताल्लुकात खराब हुए। डोनाल्ड ट्रंप के जमाने में चीजें सही थी, मगर बाइडेन साहब के जमाने में वो काफी क्रिटिकल थे। ये था हमारा आज का वॉशिंगटन से पर्सपेक्टिव। अगला मैं आपके लिए फॉलो अप दूंगा फ्रॉम ऑन द ग्राउंड इन पाकिस्तान। मेरे साथ रहिए, आज काफी सारी रिपोर्टिंग आने वाली है। नारा लगाएं, पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद।